Hello everyone. Today, I'm really excited to start our tutorials on modeling. Before we dive into that, let's first discuss the difficulties we usually encounter during this process so that we have a clear direction in our minds, and then solve them one by one through this course. First, the lack of basic knowledge. I believe it's challenging to learn modeling in the beginning. Facing so many types of brushes and functions, we may not have a clear idea of how to use them properly, pondering which brushes to use for completing a well-sculpted work quickly. Compared to professional sculpting, our messy sculpt traces make us feel disheartened. So, the problems here are how to use the software expertly and which tool to select. Most beginners initially prefer to watch various basic tutorials to master skills. Seems like we can solve most of the difficulties with these skills, but in reality, we may understand the usage of the sculpting tools yet still find it tricky to create desired works. In my opinion, breaking down some practical cases can help to a certain extent. In these cases, you will find that there are not many advanced operations. Instead, only a few common brushes and operations are used repeatedly. Actually, many beginners have a common misunderstanding. When they just start to explore animal modeling, they usually pay most attention to learning skills, rather than finding out a way to put it into practice. So after mastering basic operations through online tutorials, we'd better follow tutorials with practical examples, and this is typically more efficient. In this course, we won't dwell too much on basic operations at the beginning. Rather, we will just focus on some necessary techniques first, and the rest will be explained through actual production. The second topic is anatomy knowledge. Undoubtedly, this poses a challenge for most learners due to the complexity of muscle structure. It's difficult to develop a solid understanding of complex anatomy knowledge. But in fact, lack of anatomy knowledge doesn't hinder us from creating excellent works. Anatomy can be divided into two types: medical anatomy and artistic anatomy. Memorizing every single muscle, gland, and organ is required for a doctor. However, for us, acquiring some necessary anatomy knowledge is sufficient to achieve correct structure. So in this clear direction, what will we be learning? We only cover a few major bones and muscle forms, helping us acquire basic anatomical knowledge to create correct structures. Besides, I'll show you how to analyze the structure through muscle directions and how to transition from 2D images to 3D models. Trust me, you won't be limited by anatomy knowledge. Instead, you'll be able to directly focus on shaping. Last, let's talk about the production process. A complete production process consists of many stages. Modeling is just one part of it. We still have more work to do, such as texturing, fur, rigging, animation, etc. We will review the modeling process from the perspective of the entire production process, understanding the relationship between each stage. Each stage of the process should be considered in relation to the subsequent stages. For example, modeling is the initial stage of the work. It carries the textures, hair, rigging, and animation, so the mesh should be compatible with the later stages. Similarly, each subsequent stage is also interrelated with the preceding and following stages. In the later episodes, we will talk about the workflow of the entire production in detail, including modeling considerations that can effectively streamline the subsequent procedures. Alright, without further ado, let's get started. In this episode, we'll delve into a few essential tools, including sculpting tools and mesh editing tools. Sculpting tools involve the use of brushes and other related functions in sculpt mode. Mesh editing tools are employed to topologize meshes. In this episode, we'll cover my personal frequently used tools. Okay, let's launch Blender. Here a plane is ready. Before sculpting, it's crucial to make sure the mesh density is sufficient. I applied multi-res with level 4 here. Toggle on the wireframe. See, the mesh is pretty dense and looks like a sea of black. We can also use remesh to modify the mesh density. Let me show you with a simple example. Go back to object mode, add a cube. Initially, it has 8 faces. Enter sculpt mode, and you'll find the remesh option. Simply click on remesh without making any adjustments. Before we start sculpting, there's no change. Let me make a stroke casually. Now, many more faces have appeared. You can customize the mesh density by adjusting voxel size. Literally, the smaller it is, the denser the mesh will be. Let's set different values and take a look. The surface is smooth enough, which means the density of mesh is quite high. Thus, tiny details can be captured. In another word, different level of subdivisions will bring our sculpting details in different level. Alright, let's remove the cube and start to learn brushes. Switch to Sculpt mode and enter the sculpting workspace. There's an array of brushes, each with its unique functions. As mentioned earlier, let's initially concentrate on a few common brushes that we use most frequently and explore more later. The first brush is Draw Brush, which is one of my most frequently used brushes. It excels in shaping and building volumes, delivering effective results for both adding and removing details. Moving on, we have the Clay Strips brush. It employs a square tip shape as opposed to a round one, resulting in remarkably sharp brush strokes. After appropriate smoothing, we can easily achieve natural transitions between two muscles. Now, let's talk about the Grab brush. Its function involves roughly adjusting proportion or partially dragging, offering the flexibility to freely manipulate a specific part or the entire shape. Next one is Smooth brush, designed for smoothing uneven surface. And then Inflate brush. It's not used frequently, but is indispensable during sculpting. When we deal with confined areas, such as ears, it's challenging to control with other brushes. Because even with a small brush size, it's still difficult to avoid editing surrounding areas, much less large brush size. Inflate brush comes in handy in such situations. It is specifically designed to expand or shrink the shape as needed. When we need to add more volume, we can use this brush to inflate the required area. Similarly, we can also use this brush to reduce it by holding Control. Let's move on to the next brush, the Draw Sharp brush. It generates a reversed effect compared to the Draw brush, functioning like a cutting tool and effortlessly creating sharp grooves. Therefore, we often use it when dealing with structural transition parts. Alright, these brushes introduced so far are the ones I most frequently use in my work. Quite easy, isn't it? To enhance sculpting efficiency, I'm going to share some useful techniques with you. First one, during sculpting, smoothing is a quite frequent operation. Let me demonstrate. However, frequently switching to the smooth brush can be time-consuming. In such cases, you can simply hold Shift to activate the smoothing function quickly. Next, let's talk about the cool control trick. This works for every brush. Grab the Draw brush, casually sketch a curve, and then hold Control. Bam, you've got an inverted effect. Take another example, Draw Sharp brush. It draws a groove by default, but if we hold Control and draw, it becomes inverted. An Inflate brush. It inflates the shape by default and shrinks it when Control is held. So, as we can see, it's more flexible to sculpt with Control. These two skills above are really handy. Get ready to use them. That wraps up the basic introduction to brushes. Later on, I'll introduce more brushes and functions while we're sculpting. This way, our learning can be more effective and solid. Okay, let's continue exploring the parameters of brushes. For every brush, the radius and strength are the most basic thing you are going to deal with. Strength decides how hard the brush hits the models. By default, it's 0.5. Just turn it up to increase the influence of the brush, or turn it down to decrease it. Radius determines influence range on the models. The larger the radius is, the broader the brush's effect is. resulting in thicker strokes. Hold F to tweak the brush size, and Shift plus F to manage the strength. By the way, remember those earlier tricks we talked about? Apply them together, and you'll have a blast with your sculpting. Okay, let's talk about another parameter, stabilize stroke. Enable it. Now, after the brush path, you'll notice the red trail. It works by smoothing the brush path, resulting in a smooth curve. Let's disable stabilize stroke and compare. See, there are some jagged edges now, not as smooth as when it's turned on. So, this parameter can smooth our brush strokes. Remember to turn it on when you work on well-curved things like hair. Alright, I'm going to share 2 more tricks, which are efficiency-boosting features. I'll demonstrate it on this model. First, let's talk about face sets, a really useful feature that allows you to group faces and work on a specific part of the model. As you can see, the faces of this model have been separated into several groups. For instance, let's say I want to focus on its leg. Press H to hide the other parts. This way, the hidden parts won't be affected. After that, we can press Alt plus H to show them. To display the keyboard shortcuts I'm using, let me enable screencast keys. Face sets is easy to set up. Enter Edit mode. Select faces as needed, then go back to Sculpt mode. In the Face Sets menu, select Face Set from Edit mode selection. Once you're done with this face set, hover the brush over it and press H. Now, we can concentrate on this part. Before sculpting, it's crucial to create appropriate face sets to ensure a smoother sculpting process. For example, we can separate the upper part and lower part of mouth to 2 face sets for convenient sculpting. Also, there is a brush that can help set face sets, draw face sets. It allows us to directly draw a range without entering edit mode. Just choose one according to your needs. Next one is mask. We have 2 different ways to set mask selection. This one allows us to frame a range. The other is mask brush. Let me draw a mask and switch to a certain draw brush. See, the area covered by the mask cannot be edited. In some situations, mask can help a lot. For example, when we work on this area of thigh, it's not easy to edit our desired part only. Here, mask exactly takes care of this problem. Now, the opposite is not edited. Another example around the eyes. There are distinct eyelids with sharp and hard structures. To handle them accurately, a mask is an essential tool. By the way, Blender provides 3 different selection tools of mask: box mask, lasso mask, and line mask. And if we look at the toolbox here, there are some more parameters which we will learn about later. The last tip is about auto mask, which generates a mask automatically based on a specified condition. Pressing Alt plus A to display its menu. Let's give it a go. Check face sets. We can see each face set is independent. When we edit one of them, the others are not affected. Let's remove the mask and compare. Now, this model is fully editable. We'll delve into more details about additional auto mask features in later procedures. That's it. In the next episode, we will talk about some tools of mesh editing. That's it for the sculpt tools. Let's enter the edit mode. In this mode, we can directly edit 3D meshes. Now, I'm going to talk about some basic functions and techniques in edit mode, which are commonly used in later topology stages. Let me create a plane first and switch to edit mode. There are 3 modes available: vertex, edge, and face, which operate on the vertices, edges, and faces separately. By the way, theoretically, a well-structured topology of a 3D model not only matches the outside shape of the high poly, but also fits well with subsequent texturing and animations. Okay, let's move on. First, delete all existing meshes. Switch to the vertex mode and create a new vertex by holding Ctrl and left-clicking. Snapping is a crucial function in the topology section. It can snap a mesh to the surface. Don't forget to enable snap here. Let's click the drop-down menu and select Face Project, and also toggle Move, Rotate, and Scale on, so that the mesh always snaps to the surface when we perform movement, rotation, and scaling operations. Currently, the vertex is initially placed at a random location, but when we move it near the surface, it'll automatically snap to the surface. Let's click on this vertex, then hold E, and extrude some new vertices until here, and another vertex here. Then we select all vertices and hold E to extrude faces. Continue to extrude more faces. We can see these 3 vertices failed to form a surface, so we can select them and press F to create one. We perform the same operation on the 3 vertices here. The current quantity of polygons is small, so we can press Ctrl+R to insert a few edges. And here, we can do the same. These vertices are not in the proper position. We could adjust their positions by just dragging them. Okay, let's insert one more edge to even the size of polygons. Now, we select all vertices and press W to display this menu, then select Subdivide. Subdivide helps us add more faces to better match the surface of the high poly. Then press G to snap the vertices to the surface. Now we find that the polygons are not evenly distributed. They are relatively dense here, yet sparse there and there, dense on the sides, yet sparse in the middle. For this issue, Slide Relax Brush can perfectly take care of it. Simply ensure the mesh is selected, then switch to Sculpt mode, and find Slide Relax Brush. After that, we just hold Shift and left-click to relax the mesh, getting an even distribution of topology. Alright, go back to Edit mode and keep the vertices selected, then press G to snap them to the surface. Looks good. We can apply the same process to the other parts of the body. Okay, that will be all about the basic tools in Edit mode. In the future episodes, we will learn how to topologize a model with them, as well as the theories of topology. See you in the next one. In this section, we are delving into the skeletal structure of a wolf, highlighting some crucial points on the model skeleton. Understanding the basic skeleton allows us to better analyze proportions and construct structures, laying the groundwork for subsequent modeling, rigging, and animation. First, let's define what we mean by bone points. In anatomy, there's no concept of bone points. What we refer to as bone points are key locations on an animal's body that act like a coordinate system. The surrounding structures are points on this system, and these bone points help us accurately determine the position of these structures, thereby creating precise constructions. This explanation might seem abstract, so let's use a familiar example of a human. On a human face, there are multiple structures: eyes, nose, mouth, ears, etc., all of which have fixed positional relationships. Starting from the tip of the nose, moving down leads to the mouth, up to the bridge of the nose, right to the right cheek, and up left to the left eye. Now, if we close our eyes and I ask you what structure is above and to the right of the nose, you can answer without hesitation. It's the right eye. Below, it's the mouth. You'll notice that all our references start from one point, the tip of the nose. From this explanation, you should have a basic understanding of the practical application of bone points. They help us determine the exact location of structures based on a single point, just as we can locate other facial features using the point on the tip of the nose. Looking more closely, the face is filled with many points like this. For instance, the position of the brow ridge represents the location of the eyes, the end of the mandible determines the front view of the face shape, and the cheekbone point represents the width of the face viewing from the front. Based on this point, we can also locate the ears. There are too many points on the face to cover in detail here. Further discussing bone points, in essence, the structure of a living creature is fundamentally supported by an internal skeleton, much like the connections of muscles. Each muscle attaches to the skeleton, linked by ligaments and tendons. The shape of the muscles changes with the creature's movement. For instance, muscles stretch when we extend and compress when we contract. The one constant is the creature's skeleton. Thus, when creating models, identifying key points on the skeleton becomes our primary reference. These key points on the skeleton, which we refer to as bone points, are crucial. Let's return to the facial structure of the character, where we previously identified several points: the brow ridge, cheekbone, and mandible. Not every bone is considered a bone point. Rather, it's the critical points on the bone. For example, the point we marked on the brow ridge represents the demarcation line between the front and side of the face. The point on the cheekbone, marking the widest part of the face, is not at the front but rather set back. The point on the mandible affects the shape of a person's face and is equally important. Identify more bone points, which can help us construct the basic shape of the face. From these points, we can then create a more accurate facial structure. Bone points have many practical applications. They help us determine overall proportions. For example, when analyzing the proportions of a wolf's limbs, we base it on the positions of key bone points in the limbs. By understanding their relative positions, we can determine the length of each bone segment. Now, let's continue to our next topic, anatomy. When we start discussing the skeletal system, a myriad of structural names might flood your mind, overwhelming and expanding it instantly. As we've mentioned before, there are two types of anatomy: medical and artistic. We are not doctors, so there's no need to memorize every structure precisely. Our work serves art, and the purpose of learning is to help us create reasonable production. That's the key. So, don't feel too burdened. Here, I'm focusing on the skeletal aspects of biology, because we'll soon use this analysis as a reference. As for the muscular parts, we'll gradually introduce you to the key muscle structures during the production process. I've outlined the key parts of the biological skeleton for you. We'll progress from the general to the specific, layer by layer, hoping you'll learn genuinely practical things, not just a bunch of theory. The upcoming learning will be relaxed. Enough talk, let's get to the heart of this lesson. First, here's a wolf skeleton model I prepared earlier. In this model, I've marked different colors, which also represent different parts of the skeleton. The complex skeletal system actually follows simple and understandable rules. Breaking it down, we discuss the entire skeleton, distinguishing four parts: the head, spine, forelegs, and hind legs. Let's zoom in on the spine and hide the other parts for now. The spine can be divided into four sections: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and caudal vertebrae, representing the neck, chest cavity, waist, and tail, respectively. The cervical spine typically has 7 vertebrae, supporting head movement and posture. The thoracic spine usually has 13 vertebrae, connected to the ribs, protecting internal organs. The number of caudal vertebrae varies, responsible for supporting tail movement and balance. There are also 2 other parts, the ribs and the sternum. Their connected structure is such that the thoracic vertebrae connect to the ribs, which in turn connect to the sternum. The number of ribs usually corresponds to the number of thoracic vertebrae, which is 13. Within the entire spine, there are several key points we need to focus on, located in these areas. These points are the critical bone points of the wolf's back and also key points within the spine. They represent the junctions of parts and allow us to accurately find the positions and ranges of these structures during the creation process. That's the essential information about the spine. Now let's look at the forelegs. The foreleg is composed of 7 parts: the scapula, humerus, ulna, radius, carpal bones, metacarpal bones, and phalanges. In the foreleg, the key bone points we've marked are located at these positions, which you can see are mostly at the joints. The point at the top of the scapula actually represents the uppermost point of the foreleg, which is a primary reference when sculpting the shoulder area. Moving down to the joint where the scapula and humerus meet, this is also a key bone point in the foreleg. This point represents the junction of the foreleg with the neck, and structurally, this joint forms a more protruding structure in the foreleg, so pinpointing its location is crucial. Continuing downward, we see the only point not located at a joint. This point has a name, the olecranon, and it's positioned at the very back of the foreleg. When creating the shape of the backside of the front leg, this point serves as an important inflection point and is a structure that needs to be particularly prominent in the leg structure, as it clings close to the skin, similar to the structure of the human elbow, which is hard to touch because it is not covered by muscle. Moving further down, we come to the common connections of the bones. In the bones below, the phalanges are what we need to pay attention to next. In each toe, the bone point where the 2 phalanges connect will be the key basis for creating the foot structure later on. Among the 4 bone points, the 2 in the middle are relatively forward and upward, while the 2 on the sides are set back, which directly affects the shape of the toes after they are formed. Next, let's continue with the skeletal structure of the hind legs. The structure of the hind leg is relatively complex, consisting of the pelvis, femur, tibia, fibula, tarsal bone, metatarsal bone, and phalanges. There are more bone points in the hind leg, and we'll mark the key ones first and then explain them one by one. First are the 2 bone points on the pelvis, which we observe from 2 different angles. These 2 points are very prominent on the surface of the animal's hind legs. The first bone point is where the hind leg connects to the body, also the uppermost position of the hind leg. The second bone point is at the very end of the thigh area of the hind leg, also an important inflection point forming the side contour of the hind leg. Moving down, we see 2 points I've marked here. From a skeletal perspective, these 2 points are not at the junction of the bones. They are important because they are 2 significant inflection points in the contour of the hind leg. We might think that the hind leg is simply bent at the knee, but that's not correct. In wolves and similar creatures, when their hind legs bend, there are 2 protrusions, or inflection points, at these positions. From the structure of the bones, we can see that these 2 points are the most protruding, while the junction of the femur and tibia is sunken. So remember these 2 points. They are the key when creating the contour of the hind leg. Continuing downward, there is a small bone above the tarsal bones called the hock. This bone seems like an extra growth, and we need to focus on the point at the very top of the root bone. This point, called the point of hock, marks the connection between the calf and the foot in the hind leg and is also a key inflection point in the contour of the hind leg. Usually, this point forms a clear angle, linking the contours of the calf and the foot. Moving further down, we come to the toes. These bone points are the same as the phalanges in the foreleg and will serve as the main reference for creating the toes in the later stages. Since their structure is similar to that of the foreleg, we won't go into too much detail here. Alright, next, let's look at the head. The construction of the head is simpler, with the entire head skeleton consisting of only 2 parts, the cranium and the mandible. The cranium is the main part of the skull, enveloping and protecting the brain. The mandible is the bone located in the mouth area, supporting the lower jaw and teeth. Although the head is composed of only 2 main parts, its structure is the most complex. On the skull, there are several important bones we need to pay attention to: the frontal bone, zygomatic bone, nasal bone, and lower jawbone. Here, let's introduce a few key components of the head. First is the wolf's forehead, composed of the frontal bone, parietal bone, interparietal bone, and occipital bone. These 4 bones internally support the structure of the forehead. In this part, there are 2 key bone points, located at the positions of the frontal bone and the interparietal bone. Here, the brow ridge contains 2 points, left, and right. I usually consider this point as the center of the coordinate system of the head. From this point, we can find the structural lines of several key parts of the head. We will explain this point in later parts. For now, just remember this point, as we will use it later. The bone point located on the inner parietal bone and the occipital bone is often overlooked because it is hidden between the two ears. This point represents the very end of the head and is also a key inflection point in the contour. It links the contours of the head and neck. Continuing on, the entire eye socket is composed of two main bones, the frontal bone and the zygomatic bone. Of course, there is also a small bone called the lacrimal bone. Because it is relatively small, it is not very important to us. The main reason it is mentioned here is that the lacrimal bone also plays a role in the eye socket's composition. A key bone point here is located on the temporal bone behind the zygomatic bone. This point represents the widest position of the head. Next, we move on to the mandible, which is comprised of a single bone that supports the entire lower portion of the head's shape. In our human skeleton, this bone also significantly influences the shape of the face. Touch your own jaw, you can distinctly feel the bone inside. The same applies to animals. Despite the sides being covered by multiple muscles, the bottom bone is basically covered by skin. Therefore, when sculpting the jaw structure, the shape of this bone is pronounced. Looking forward, the construction is quite straightforward, consisting of the nasal bone, maxilla, and incisive bone. This section forms the structure of the nose and upper mouth. Below that is another part, the teeth. Yes, teeth grow on the bones and are, in fact, a part of the skeletal structure. In the oral cavity, wolves have a total of 42 teeth, including 12 incisors, 4 canines, 16 premolars, and 10 molars. With the completion of the head's explanation, our introduction to the entire skeleton concludes here. There is much more to delve into for an in-depth explanation, but what we've covered serves as the primary basis for the work to follow. If you're deeply interested in this area, you're encouraged to research and study further on your own. This lesson almost comes to an end here, and I hope it hasn't put anyone to sleep. In explaining each part, we've not only discussed the names and compositions of the bones, but also elaborated on the key bone points of each section. You don't need to remember every bone's name right away. Learning and memorizing them gradually is fine. The key bone points we've introduced will serve as the crucial basis for our modeling process to come. Before modeling, we need to gather plentiful references. They will be the backbone of our modeling. So this step is absolutely crucial in the process. Since we are making 3D models after real animals, we need to acquire photos and videos as many as possible for later analysis. But if you are making a fantastic creature, you'll need a clear concept and get all information that you need. Alright, before we get into modeling, we should first determine what species we will create and what information we should acquire, and what kind of reference pictures or videos we should find out. Let's say we are going to make a 3D wolf. First, I want to gather some essential information of different wolves, such as their breeds, coat colors, body shapes, living environments and habits, etc. Breed is the first to consider. There are plenty of different breeds of wolves, and each has different coat colors, body shapes, living environments and habits, etc. I ultimately choose to focus on the Eurasian wolf. With this decision made, I will proceed to conduct in-depth research using Wikipedia or other reliable resources. First, I aim to gather information on the size of the Eurasian wolf. According to Wikipedia, Eurasian wolves measure 110 to 150 centimeters in length and 60 to 85 centimeters in shoulder height. Additionally, I plan to explore documentaries and other resources to gain further knowledge, in this way to build a clearer outline in our mind. Next, I look into the references. I'd like to show you my reference pictures. Numerousness, in fact, I've filtered out many to ensure we focus only on the most useful ones. Here, let me explain how I obtained these reference pictures and which ones we specifically need. The reference images are divided into two sections, body and head. First, I'll present my primary reference taken from a panoramic view. Essentially, determining a primary reference is crucial as it provides us with a clear direction to find other reference images. After reading the information on Eurasian wolves and looking through all the reference pictures, I choose this one as the primary reference and then look for additional reference pictures from different perspectives. What made me choose this picture? This picture depicts the Eurasian wolf accurately, showcasing its nice coat color and intact whole body without any obstruction in the panoramic view. Therefore, this picture perfectly meets our expectations. I once took this picture into consideration, yet the wolf's fur in this picture had faded away a lot and it looked very emaciated. That was not in line with my ideas. Thus we chose this one. Alright, let's see other references, some with a bit of perspective effect, and some with a little bit of back perspective effect, and side views and perspective views as well. This picture contains a front view, a side view, and a perspective view. I also found these references of back perspective views and front views. There are many front views, including centered front views, perspective views, and so on. Moreover, we found a reference of the top view as well, from which we can observe the silhouette of the wolf body. There are some additional references of special perspectives for observing the outline of the wolf legs. We aim to find out the pictures of wolf from various angles, since multiple views allow us to grasp the overall structure. This way, we can work on the production process confidently. Without reference images, we would only be able to estimate, which often leads to inaccurate results. So we need to have precise references as guidance. Fine organization and marks are also needed for easy and quick search. Alright, let's go on talking about the references of head. In this case, I want to create a brave and resolute character instead of a foxy and fierce one. The image of the head largely determines the overall effect. So we do a more detailed classification for the references of head. Here are a perspective view and a front view. After determining the temperament of the wolf, I extensively reviewed numerous references to observe the appearance and silhouette of wolves. Ultimately, I decided to create an alpha wolf character embodying the temperament and style of it. To accurately capture this temperament in the character's face, I need a precise reference for guidance. We can see that some wolves are squinting, or even stick out their tongues. Just like this picture, this wolf looks like a dog begging for food. Obviously, those images do not meet our requirements. In this picture, the eyes and facial silhouettes are very sharp, which presents the general image of an alpha wolf. You may notice that the main references from front view and perspective view are of the same wolf. We can see it from the front view that the facial features and expression in its eyes are very coordinate. I also found a few extra references, some had defects though. For example, this wolf's snout is crooked. After comprehensive consideration, I finally selected these two pictures as our main references, one for the perspective view and one for the front view and side views. By the way, it's important to ensure that the silhouette of the wolf is clear enough for observation. See, each one has sharp outlines. These two final choices feature clear silhouettes against white backgrounds, as well all proper angles. Additionally, I found additional reference images as different views of the head, which were saved just in case. For example, some of them can help us observe the wolf's snout from the top view, as well as the outlines of the wolf's eyes. Anyway, it is necessary to collect references from various view angles. Here are some references of wolves looking up. We can refer to the structure of the jaw and the snout, avoiding any visual blind spots. And we can analyze the structure of the wolf's mouth and the teeth in these two pictures. There is another important category of references, muscle and structure. I have organized these pictures into one section. Typically, it is difficult to observe the muscle structure of an Eurasian wolf, clearly due to its long hair. To solve this, we can seek reference pictures featuring wolves with shorter hair. And we can search for technical images of muscle structure online. You will find a lot. Due to copyright issues, we cannot show them in this tutorial. Here are the reference pictures of shorter hair, and we can see the structures are distinct. Therefore, I categorize these references as muscle and structure. Take a look at this picture. We can see any part of the body from the outline, like the thigh here is quite obvious. When the fur is shorter, the bone structure becomes clearer, including the muscle of the front shoulder here. Perhaps this wolf is slightly thinner, but it's still useful as a reference for body structure. Let's look at this picture. This seated wolf shows us the shape of its toes, a side outline of its front legs, as well as the inside structure. Move on to this picture. The transition of ankles and the upper limbs are distinct, as well as the transition between the thigh and lower part of the hind leg. Next up, this picture shows us what the silhouette of hind leg looks like. These 4 pictures all show the same wolf, and we can clearly see the muscle outline of its legs. Its fur is short, through which we can clearly see the muscle outline, and that gives us a direction of production. Meanwhile, I also found a picture of a dog as a reference. This dog has no hair. We can take it as an auxiliary reference of body structure, since wolves and dogs are both canids and have similar body structures. Of course, we can't make the dog a complete reference, because dogs and wolves are different after all, and we can only take it as an auxiliary reference. In fact, I already filtered out a lot of references while searching. The remaining pictures are part of the selection. I keep them for the unique view angles which may be useful in the later process. They may not be useful at the moment. Chances are that the existing references may not be enough. Then these references may satisfy our requirements at that time. In this regard, I just put them into another category in case we want to refer to them later. Alright, done with the requirements for the references and what references we need. And I'd like to add something. The main purpose of this search is to guarantee sufficient references during the production process. Otherwise, we may be confused or have no direction due to the lack of references of a certain part, which may cause us to make incorrect decisions after working for a long time, and we have to solve the additional problems and deviations, which is but a waste of time. Until then, the production process may become unnecessarily difficult. So putting more efforts in the early stage for searching references can certainly save us a lot of time. From my perspective, after I went through so many references of wolves, I became much clearer about the feature of the wolves. Anyways, it is recommended to try your best to go through each reference and observe it carefully. After examining each reference, you determine it's useful or not. Useful ones should be collected and organized, while others may be deleted. Finally, we organize and classify these references for easy access, and we will have a clearer direction. Okay, let's move forward. In the previous episode, we have got all the references we are going to use. Now, it's time to analyze and mark these references. Adding marks to these references can make it easier to observe them during the production process. This approach enables us to easily assess the proportions between each part of the body and the contours, which is the main purpose of the analysis. Alright, let's analyze our determined reference pictures, including perspective view, front view, and back view for head analysis, as well as panoramas, front view, and muscle structure for the body. If you get some extra references which seem to be useful, feel free to analyze them too. Well, thorough analysis is essential, as it shows us a direction for the subsequent production stages. Here are the 6 primary references that we will analyze: a panoramic picture, a front view, and a structural reference, as well as 3 different views for the head. Well, let's get started on the analysis. We have obtained some information about the size of wolves. Eurasian wolves measure 110 to 150 centimeters in length and 60 to 85 centimeters in shoulder height. However, this data alone is insufficient to build a complete model. To acquire more precise and detailed data, it is necessary to measure each bone to determine the proportions between each body part. This approach enables us to gather more accurate and detailed information for modeling. Alright, let me show you how. First, we take a bone as the unit to measure other bones. Here I start with the ankle. Let's mark the ankle length in the picture and mark it as 1 unit. By the way, remember to add a new layer for marks, and later we will add more layers for further analysis. So just add a new layer if possible. Okay, let's continue. This is the length for the ankle bone, marked as 1. Next is the upper bone. We measure it based on the ankle bone. It is roughly 2 times the length of the ankle, marked as 2 units. Then the upper one, approximately here. Compared to the ankle bone, this is roughly 1.5 units. Here it is the shoulder blade, roughly 2 units. Now, someone may have a question. Should we consider the length of the fur? considering that different animals have different length and thickness of fur. For example, this wolf has thick fur, so how do we find the edge of the body, or whether the measuring length should extend to the fur? If not, how do we measure the length correctly? I will explain it soon. Here I have to clarify that our measurement doesn't include the length of fur, otherwise it causes inaccurate results. Actually, we just got some rough information about the proportions, so it's fine to estimate the approximate length of the fur. Take this area of the back as an example, why I mark the edge here. Although the wolf's fur is long, it slightly adheres to the wolf's skin and form a thin layer, so I roughly determine the end here. Here, we simply grasp the method of analysis and measurement without needing to strive for overly accurate data. However, it's important to eliminate the interference caused by the thickness of the fur. So far, we have basically determined the proportions of the wolf's forelimbs after analyzing and measuring this picture. This will provide us with shortcuts in the production process. Just like these two bones, they are the same in length. That means when we create this one, and the other one can be roughly determined at the same time. So, it's common to compare the length of a bone with others, which can help us create models more precisely. The proportion analysis is like, this one is the same as that, and the length of this one is 2 times of that one. That's what we need. Alright, let's move on. We can pick red for new marks. Now let's mark the length of the wolf's body and hind legs. The body length measures from the very right of hind leg to the very left of the forelimb. Estimate its length based on the length of the ankle. It is roughly 3 times the length of the ankle. Here mark it as 3. It may be 2.5 if we measure it more accurately, but 3 is fine. Okay, we continue to mark the hind leg, starting with the top bone. It is roughly 1.5 units. For this one, its length is nearly the same as this one. Well, maybe this green one looks a bit longer. Anyways, it's not accurate to measure with eyes. Okay, move on to the next one. Its length is 2.5 units. Shorter than the body. This bone measures 2 units. And this one is 1.5 units. Okay, we have completed the proportional analysis of the wolf's body. So, after analyzing and marking the picture, we are clear about the proportions among bones. We can see this one is 1 unit longer than that, and this one is half a unit longer than that one. Also, we can see this one is 1 unit shorter than that one. So the length of this one is nearly the same as that. This way, we will have precise measurements of the length of all parts, instead of merely observing through eyes or guessing. Well, let's shift to the neck. For this section, as the fur on the neck is so thick and long, it's hard to make an accurate analysis. But it would be okay to get the rough proportions, and we will put it into practice when building up the rough shape later. Move on to the neck. Its length is roughly 1.5 units. It is almost the same as this one. Next, we get to mark the head. Let's pick another color. The head includes 2 measurements, one is length and the other is height. We can see the length of the head is roughly 2 units. And the height of the head is roughly 1.5 units. Alright, we have just completed the overall analysis of proportions for the wolf. After analyzing the proportions, I believe it will be easier for us to manage the overall proportions during the modeling process. Well, that's all about the proportions analysis. We have done the analysis of the proportions with this picture, which can be used for modeling. Next, we are going to analyze the contour of the wolf's body. The primary principle of analysis is from rough shape to details step by step. To get a rough contour shape, we can find each turning point along the contour and connect them with lines. Take this picture as an example. We add a new layer. Observing the side contour of the forelimbs, we find and mark 4 points on it and link them to form a line. These turning points are crucial for us to efficiently draw the accurate outline of forelimbs. We can employ the same method to the inner side of forelimbs. Mark the turning points and connect them. So are the other parts. The next one is the head. Here is the side view of the head. Similarly, we can find out the turning points and connect them. Then we got a complete and accurate outline of the head. But this is not perfect yet. A principle I mentioned before is, from rough shape to detail step by step. The structure of the head is complex. It's not a simple contour as the forelimb. There are more subtle structural turnings, which we will further analyze. We add a new layer and change the brush color. Mark some finer turning points based on the previous analysis. Now we got a finer outline. So we got a new outline. That is the effect we need. Alright, the analysis for the side view is done. Now, let's do a quick exercise with the ears. First, mark out several distinctive turning points, and then connect them to create a rough outline. Due to the complexity of the contour of the ears, we have to further mark more points. Let's reconnect these points into an accurate outline. Okay, we have completed the analysis for the ears after marking twice. Click to reopen the layer of the head. The twice analysis processes we have performed is the same process to the modeling. Like we first need to mark out some crucial turning points, then refine the structure of our model step by step. From rough shape to detail step by step, this is a clear direction for producing. Alright, we have analyzed proportions and contours of the references, but we have not finished all. The remaining one to be analyzed is the structure. The analysis process is as simple as following the visual contour of the references we have, instead of considering the complex structure of muscle. Here is the front view of the head. We continue employing the same analysis process to the complex structures, so as to find a clear direction for the production. In the reference, we hope to draw the volume and analyze its structure. According to the principle, we need to find some crucial structural lines based on the analysis. And here, the eyebrow is a key point. This is the symmetric one. The wolf's eyebrows are like a coordinate system, relying on which we can mark out all structural lines. Look, here we can draw a line. So it separates the forehead and side face, forming a closed area. Then we do the same to the right side. Draw a closed pentagon on the forehead. Then we do the same to the bridge of the nose. And it forms two surfaces, the left side and the right side. There is a surface at the front of the nose. We need to mark it. Then we connect these points into lines. Alright, we finished the facial analysis for the front view. In fact, we analyzed the structural lines based on the varying light and shadow in the references. Also, we have the eyes. Regarding the eyes, we can simply present them as spheres. Imagine that we create a rough structure based on an analysis in the 3D software. Here we place a sphere as well, merge with the surfaces to produce a complete facial structure. Ignore the complex muscle lines and structures, just focus on the facial analysis. This can streamline the workflow and give us a clear direction for producing. Okay, it's done. Let's turn to the perspective view. We first need to find 2 points on the eyebrows. We can look at the varying light and shadows in the picture and find the obvious turnings. Here we can directly mark out the side part of the face. This line separates the forehead and side face into 2 parts. Above here is also a surface. Then we go on drawing other lines. Oops, let me correct this. Look, here the side part forms a closed area. We still take the bridge of the nose as the boundary and draw a line, then a surface at the front of the nose is formed. Meanwhile, the side parts of the nose also form a surface. We connect these points into lines. As we can't see the left side of the face in this picture, we can skip it. After we marked it out, we streamline the complex facial composition and convert it into the simple geometric structure, including the sphere of the eyes. That's the full geometric structure of the head. Sorry, I missed the chin. There should be a surface on the chin. Mark the outline of the chin based on the turning points. So is the jaw. Alright, it's done for the analysis of the head. Sorry, I missed the jaw in the front view, but the actual effect of the current geometric structure still looks clear. The light and shadows on the other side are not sharp enough, so we can't see the exact outline clearly. Okay, we have completed the structural analysis for the wolf's face. In a word, if we can locate the points, lines, and surfaces in the references, then we are able to employ the accurate analysis for the facial structure. Next, let's turn to the structural analysis for the wolf's body. Moreover, I found a picture as the structure reference. I chose it because some structural lines can be clearly seen, so I hope to analyze it further. A body commonly consists of the thorax, waist, abdomen, and limbs. Here we add a new layer. As the wolf's fur is so long, we can't see the clear structure. If you can find some clearer ones, then you can follow the same analysis process as in the head section. Alright, let's get back to the picture. We can see the clear contour of the thorax and directly draw its outlines. Furthermore, we can mark out the waist, the abdomen, and the hind leg, as well as the front shoulder. As the picture is not clear, we can't see a more precise geometric structure, but it gives us a direction at least. Okay, the analysis for the reference is done. In addition to what we have mentioned before, there's another approach we will employ later in modeling. It's called the negative space, which refers to other parts beyond the subject. Well, let's go back to the panoramic view. Look, there is a closed area surrounding the whole wolf body. It's called the negative space, which can assist us in analyzing the geometric structures. This is more suitable to mark the partial contour. Like, we need to further refine the contour after marking the geometric structure of the hind leg. Then the negative shape can assist. The contour of the character can be marked after an analysis, but how to confirm whether it is correct or not? There we can mark out its negative space and compare it with the original, then we will know the accuracy, and so are the other parts. Here we can draw the outline of the negative shape with selection tool, then connect the points, fill the area with red and adjust transparency. A polygon is formed. We can compare it with the reference regarding the length of each edge or the overall shape. If we find this edge shorter than the reference, then the height or angle may be incorrect. Finally, we completed the accurate geometric structure by combining both approaches. Well, perhaps you still have no idea of how to use the negative shape to analyze the references. For this, I'll leave it in the upcoming episodes. Good job. Till now, we have all preparations done. Generally, I spend 2 days around for each character and looking for the references and organizing, which is worth it for a more accurate production plan. Besides, the process of looking for the references is pretty fun. Alright, that's all. In the next episode, we'll dive into modeling. See you. In this chapter, we're gonna dive into the real deal. I've brought in those references we analyzed earlier. Let me sort them into their categories. Before we get started, I'd like to make something clear. After we wrapped up the last section, I went over the analysis we did and made a few tweaks. Firstly, I cleaned up the lines to make them clearer. And secondly, on this front view picture, I found out more to mark. Like the structure of the front leg. You can see this isn't just a simple outline. There are some more complex structures in the middle. Also, I marked out the structure on the other front leg, as well as this hind leg. Note that the silhouette of this hind leg is clearly visible, so it's valuable for reference. Except for what we did earlier, I did a more detailed analysis on it using the same method I introduced, sketching out the turning points and then connecting the lines. Apart from this picture, the other references are the same as what we analyzed in the previous episode. Alright, let's move each of these references into their respective categories. In order to observe them conveniently later, just place them next to the main reference correspondingly. Enlarge this one a little bit. Okay, launch Blender. First, let's adjust the layout. We need to make sure the references are well positioned, so we can see them at all times while working. Let me put them on the right. If you have two screens, it's a good idea to put the references on the other one. Here, for the sake of showing you my operations, I'll put it on the side. Let me adjust the layout a bit more. Alright, next up, we're going to work on creating a base shape from a base geometry. I like to call this approach geometric thinking. Every complex creature actually has a very simple underlying logic. Before we start creating, we need to learn to observe it with this holistic mindset so that we won't be intimidated by those complex structures and have no idea where to start. As we analyzed the references earlier, we mentioned a principle. From rough shape to details step by step, we'll follow the same approach while creating. Instead of directly diving into making each part very detailed, we'll start by creating the big shape. When analyzing the references, we also started from the big picture and then gradually refined and added details. It's the same when we work on modeling. At the beginning, we start by creating its primary structure and then tweak and refine the structure step by step until we get everything looking just right. Before we dive into the actual modeling, I'd like to walk you through a couple of Blender settings that might come in handy and help you understand my setup better. Let me enable the screencast keys first, and then open the settings panel. The first thing I want to talk about is autosave. It's common for software to crash or unexpectedly close during the modeling process, which can result in damaged or missing files. To ensure a more reliable modeling process, we need to check if autosave is enabled. The timer represents the interval of autosave, meaning the number of minutes between each save. Save versions determines how many versions are saved. In file paths, there is temporary files, which indicates the path where autosave files are stored. By default, Blender doesn't have this setting specified, so we need to select a path by ourselves. I've already set it up. It's essential to ensure these settings are correctly configured, so as to prevent any damage to the project file in case of software crashes. Next is Orbit method. Select navigation. Blender provides two orbit methods, turntable and trackball. The second one will be involved in our ladder procedures. Trackball allows us to tumble our view in any angle, while turntable keeps the z-axis upright. Each method has its own advantages. In early stages of production, we usually focus on the overall shape and ensure that the proportions between all parts are correct, so a level perspective is better. Later, when detailing the structure, we can switch to trackball mode. For now, we keep turntable. Select Input and find Tablet API there. By default, it's automatic. I prefer to set it to Windows Ink. I found that automatic mode may cause jittering when we use a tablet pen. If you also encounter this issue, you can choose Windows Ink to resolve it. I just keep it as Windows ink for smooth sculpting. That's all for Blender's settings. Except for those mentioned above, everything else remains the default. Alright, let's switch to sculpt layout. During sculpting, switching brushes can be frequent, and it can be time-consuming to manually select them each time. To speed up our sculpting process, we can use the hotkey Shift plus Spacebar to show the brush list and switch brushes quickly. Now, let's delve into this shortcut a bit further. We'll open the Preferences and then select the Key Map section. We can see 3 spacebar actions: Play, Tools, and Search. By default, it's set to play, meaning when you press the spacebar, the current animation will play. Therefore, to display the brush list, we need to hold Shift and press spacebar. Alternatively, you can set the spacebar action to Tools. This way, you'll only need to press the spacebar to show the list. If you set it to Search, pressing the spacebar won't show the brush list. So, if you encounter any issue concerning the brush list, remember to double-check the settings here. For now, let's leave it as is. Cool. Another way to quickly access the brush list is by using Quick Favorites. Simply right-click on a brush and select Add to Quick Favorites. After that, you can simply press Q. The brushes you just added will appear. See, easy but handy. You can add more brushes into the Quick Favorites as needed. All the brushes we've added are here. Feel free to add whatever you need. Quick Favorites isn't just for brushes. You can add all sorts of components here. Just right-click on anything and select Add to Quick Favorites, and it just works. Also, you can add any specific button or parameter to the list. Simply right-click to add it. Pretty handy, isn't it? Alright, let's save the project file. A clear and organized naming convention often helps our project progress smoothly. For example, the name of the project plus the creation date. Alright, let's dive into the real work now. Remove unwanted items and adjust our work layout. Alright, let's move the references aside so we can easily see them. The first step in modeling is getting the big shape done, just like this picture we analyzed earlier. Based on our analysis, we're gonna sculpt out a big shape. We start by creating a new sphere. That's where we'll kick things off. Enter Sculpt mode. And let's remesh the sphere to even out the mesh. Toggle on X symmetry. This part here is gonna be the wolf's chest cavity, so I'll trim off the anterior part and posterior part to match that shape. The Line Project tool here is just perfect for this job. Note that its lowest part is in the middle of the chest cavity, over here. Smooth this area a bit. This is the front part of the chest cavity. Let's just roughly bring the shape out, because our main focus at the moment is to outline its overall form. Let's take a moment to see if the current shape looks right. I think the front upper part should be a bit higher. Well, it's good enough for this stage. Next, let's move on to the belly. Since it's small, I'm planning to pull it out from this cavity. Create a mask based on the shape of the belly. And then press Ctrl+I to invert the mask. Now, use Grab Brush to pull the belly out. This way, we won't mess up the chest cavity shape we just created. You may notice that the mesh density here is a bit low. Let's redistribute the mesh of the belly with Remesh. Instead of clicking the Remesh button, We can also use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+R, which is very convenient and fast. This is a new technique that we haven't mentioned before, and I'll share more of these in the upcoming steps. Okay, done with the belly. Next, we're gonna work on the waist part. Switch to object mode. Start off with a cube and place it over here. Later, we'll turn on symmetry. For now, it's fine to just focus on one side. Remesh it. In panel, here is symmetry. Simply click Symmetrize to mirror the other side. Smooth it out a bit. Switch to Inflate Brush to inflate and soften this hard edge. Use Grab Brush to bring the rough shape out. In this stage, we didn't work much on the proportion or the shape, since it's too rough to adjust them correctly. Instead, we will do the job after finishing this big shape. Nice. It's okay for now. Then, let's move on to the posterior part. The pelvis connects the hind legs to the body. Let's first roughly shape the pelvis with a trapezoid. Then, move on to the hind leg. Create a sphere, place it over here. Switch to sculpt mode, then remesh it. We first drag it to fit its own rough shape. Cut its top and bottom with Line Project tool. Roughly adjust its shape again. There is a mistake. The pelvis isn't correct. It should be a slope. Alright. Let's continue to tweak the thigh. Now, we just work on the rough shape, so no need to go hard on it. Let's mirror it. Add a mirror modifier. There's something wrong. Its location is shifted a bit. Press Ctrl+A to apply transforms. Perfect. Now, let's work on the forelimb shoulder. First, create a cube to show its rough shape. Insert a loop cut. The scapula is not directed toward the very left, so let's rotate it. Okay, just keep it like this. Add a mirror modifier. The same operation as before. Next, let's focus on this part of the forelimb and also the calf. First off, for the forelimb, we grab a UV sphere, scale it down. and then squish it to make it thinner. Jump into sculpt mode and remesh it. Roughly adjust its shape. We use Line Project to cut the top and bottom. Finally, we just drag it around until we've got the shape we want. Easy peasy. We need to take a look from multiple angles to make sure everything looks right. Adjust it to this effect for now. Moving on to the calf of the hind leg. Right now, this part of the hind leg seems a bit too bulky, so we need to make some adjustments. Let's set the location of 3D cursor at this point here. Set transform pivot point to 3D cursor and scale them down a bit. Grab another sphere and jump into sculpt mode. Remesh it. We just adjusted its scale a moment ago. You can see the values right here. When we switch to sculpt mode, the brush is also scaled. To fix that, let's apply the scale before we start sculpting. Now, the brush should work properly. Next up, let's do the same thing. Drag it to shape it. Give it a little squeeze. Then, move it to the right position and rotate it. Trim off the top and bottom, and then tweak the overall shape. We can now refer to the previous analysis on body proportions. At this point, our goal is to ensure that the big shape is well structured, so focusing on the overall shape is sufficient. Note that spending too much time on details can distract us from getting the big picture right, and may lead to an improper overall shape. Alright, let's move on to creating the lower part of the front leg. Grab a sphere just like before. Enter sculpt mode and remesh it. Then, use the Line Project tool to cut off the top and bottom. Now, we use Grab Brush to shape it. Okay, it should connect well to the front shoulder. Nice. Add a mirror modifier for them. And this part. Great. Let's apply all of the mirror modifiers. We can just keep X-symmetry, since it's convenient to sculpt and observe both sides quickly. Now, let's move on to the ankle parts. Create a sphere. Enter sculpt mode and bring out its form. remesh it. To mirror it, we can also use symmetrize here. But before that, don't forget to apply its location. Switch to object mode and apply location. And then switch to sculpt mode, symmetrize it. Because it's X, here, select plus X to X. Perfect. Let's move on to the hind legs. Grab a cube. Then add a mirror modifier and apply it. Oops, I forgot to turn on symmetry for the ankle. Let me fix it. The overall proportion is off. The trunk is fat, yet limbs are small. Let's first finish the basic shape, and then we'll adjust the proportions. Alright, next up are paws. Grab a cube. Duplicate one for rear paws. The front lower leg isn't long enough. Let's extend it to a proper length. Mirror. Good. Now, we have finished the basic shape, and we're gonna adjust the overall proportion. But before that, we'd better combine these individuals in order to adjust them holistically. Ctrl+J to combine them. Don't forget to apply all mirror modifiers, otherwise they won't work. Enter sculpt mode. See, the entire body becomes an integrated unit, and if we move any part of it, we move them all. In the previous episode, we mentioned a bit about Auto Mask tool. Here we're gonna apply it. Hold Alt+A to display the Auto Mask menu. Select Topology. Now, these objects are behaving as if they are not combined. You can also use By Loose Parts from Initialize Face Sets. It separates face sets based on connected mesh. Okay, let's adjust the proportions based on our analysis. First, let's compare the length of the chest and the legs. The chest part, from the front legs to the hind legs, is approximately 1 ankle's length longer than the front shoulders. But now, the length of the chest is much longer than the front shoulder. So, let's fix this issue. The front shoulder is too small. In the length of the parts of hind legs, the proportion seems incorrect and we need to modify it. Next, let's compare the length of the front shoulder and the upper front leg. The length is close, just about half an ankle's length shorter. So, we extend the upper front leg a bit. That looks right. For the ankle part, let's keep the current length for now. Well, I forgot to mirror the front paws. Let me fix it. Alright, looks good. Let's adjust the hind legs now. The length of this part of the hind leg here is actually close to the upper part here, just slightly shorter. Let's make a bit of adjustment. Great. Now, let's adjust the ankle part. The width of the chest part needs to be a bit narrower. The proportions are almost there. Next, let's adjust the pose. The front and hind legs are currently quite straight, which looks awkward. Let's find a reference to the front view and adjust the pose accordingly. Turn off Auto Mask and make some overall adjustments. Also, we turn off symmetry so we work on just one side. Now, let's move and rotate the front paws outward a bit for a better stance. Alright, let's mirror that. The front leg stance is looking good now. Next up, let's tweak the hind legs. Straight up and down looks weird, so let's give them a bit of adjustment. Let's also angle the paws outward a bit to make it look more natural. Perfect, let's mirror again. The knees are too close. Let's adjust them a bit more. Turn on X symmetry. Good. Proportions and pose are looking good for now. Alright, time to work on the remaining parts, the neck and head. Go back to object mode and create a sphere. Based on our reference, the head is raised up, but we need to start with a basic pose for later rigging, hair creation, and other stuff. So, we're going to go for a neutral pose, like a T pose when we're making human characters, not a sitting or walking one, which can mess with later steps. So, what we need is a reference of the wolf looking at eye level. If we can't find one, we might need to edit it, rotate this part to make it work. Let's turn on symmetry and start shaping its neck. Meanwhile, we'll make sure it's of the right size. Its length is approximately the same as the front shoulder. Try to make it accurate. Use Line Project tool to cut off the front part and rear part and remesh it. Make sure the root of the neck is connected to the chest cavity well, and maintain the right length. Alright, that's it for the neck. Next, let's move on to the head. In this stage, a simple shape is fine to represent the head, such as a cube. Edit it a bit to become a trapezoidal prism. The length of the head is the same as the neck. That's it. Next is the tail. Simply grab a cylinder and adjust its length. Alright, all parts are now built. Let's combine these objects together. Before making any further edits, let's move it to ensure it's standing on the ground. Select a point on the bottom of the foot, then position the cursor at that point. Select Object from the menu, then Set Origin, then Origin to 3D Cursor. Set the location along the Z-axis to 0, so its bottom is above the ground. Let's check the size. According to our research, the shoulder height of a wolf is typically between 60 to 85 centimeters, which corresponds to the height along the Z-axis. Too large now, let's scale it down to get the right size. Now, a bit of the head's height is actually included, so just adjust it to 87 centimeters for now. The body length of a real wolf is between 110 centimeters and 150 centimeters, so the current size is basically in line. Apply all transforms. Oops, I forgot to move it to the world center. Apply location again. Okay, let's tweak the shape further. From the current result, the overall proportions look good, but we just need to double check. It looks like the hind legs need a bit more adjustment, a little fat. Then the calves. Currently, the symmetry is a bit off. Let's symmetrize it. There seems to be an issue with the symmetry. Let's check it out. Oh, it isn't at the world center. Okay, let's fix it. Find a point in the middle and move the cursor to this point. Then set the origin of this mesh to 3D cursor. Then set the location along the x-axis to 0 and apply it. Symmetrize again. Good. Now symmetry works well. Let's check the proportions from the top view. Find out the reference of the top view first. Here's a note. You can see that the waist should be a bit thinner than the chest. And all the legs should also be slimmer. Let's narrow them down a bit. Turn off Auto Mask and make some further adjustments. While adjusting, we can zoom out to observe the overall shape better. We can always toggle Auto Mask on and off as needed, which gives us more flexibility and control. So far, I've been repeatedly modifying the proportions without going into more detailed operations. This is because getting the proportions right at this stage will make the later stages smoother. Alright, at this stage, we've reached a good point in terms of proportions. Next, we'll merge these objects into one, and then use remeshing to connect them together for more detailed structural refinement. In the following chapters, there won't be much explanation, as most of the time will be spent on gradually refining the structure and finally shaping a realistic model. Alright, that's all for this episode.